WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been arbitrarily detained by Sweden and the United Kingdom since his arrest in London on 7 December 2010 as a result of the legal action taken against him by both governments. The expert panel called on the Swedish and British authorities to end Mr. Assange's deprivation of liberty. I think the recommendation is quite clear. Respect his physical integrity and freedom of movement, and afford him the right to compensation.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. By the way, that was Christophe Pouchot from the United Nations Working on Arbitrary Detention. That's something I played here on WBAI beginning way back early, I think, February 2017. So everything he demanded there, everything has not been met, as you know. And by the way, that was Anton Karas from The Third Man. I'm Randy Credico, and this is Randy Credico live on the fly on 99.5 FM here in New York City, WBAI.org. Support the station by going to give to the number 2, WBAI.org, or calling the number that Reggie just pointed out. The correct number is 516-620-3602. Well, we have a great show today, folks. A lot of developments since I last spoke to this wonderful guest that I have, which was last May 23rd, 2020. It's Ben is the best. Ben Weisner is the ACLU's Director on Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. And he's also Ed Snowden's lead attorney and a whole lot more. He's one of the great litigators of our time on some of the most progressive legal issues that are really hurting this nation. Ben, welcome back.
Nice to chat with you, Andy. How are you?
Good. It's been a long time. I spoke to you last May 23rd, right after the first half of the Assange trial, extradition trial, right afterwards. And I there's been a lot of water under the bridge since then. And I want to begin by asking you your thoughts on the second phase of the trial, which took place in early September. I know you were monitoring that, and just give us your overview of what you saw there.
Well, I think, the overview was a little bit of a paradox, right? Because the result of the trial was an order from the judge that Assange should not be extradited. But I'm here to say that the fundamental decision by the judge was a really, really dangerous one for press freedom around the world. As I'm sure your listeners know, the reason why the judge said that Assange should not be extradited is because she believed that the combination of his physical and mental health and the deplorable prison conditions that he would face under special administrative measures would amount to cruel and inhuman punishment. And for that reason, he should not be extradited. But what the judge also said was that the underlying charges against him, that is, that he could face felony charges in the United States for publishing U.S. government secrets, were not a political offense, were in fact extraditable. And if that kind of ruling stands on the books, it's really a threat to journalists, publishers, and sources around the world. And I've said this to you before, but I think people have not paid enough attention to this. What is going on here is that the United States is saying that an Australian publisher can be held criminally liable for serious felony charges for not honoring U.S. secrecy rules. Now, of course, it's the job of journalists to dishonor secrecy rules. That's what we need them to do. But it's especially egregious that the U.S. thinks that every publisher in the world commits a crime when it refuses to be bound by U.S. secrecy laws. And to me, that is really the major takeaway, is that while the court reached the right decision on extradition, it fundamentally reached the wrong decision on the law, and that precedent is going to be harmful to a lot of people in the future if it's not reversed.
But last week I spoke to attorney Jesslyn Radack, and she said that what this would do potentially is get other countries that are slammed in the press in the U.S. by journalists, that they could file charges against them.
Well, I mean, so think about it. Again, I don't know how likely, China or Russia or Iran is to actually bring criminal charges against, say, a New York Times reporter when the Times publishes those countries' secrets. But supposing they did, on what basis would the U.S. government object? On what basis would the U.S. say this is totally unacceptable, right? We have seen the New York Times publish top-secret documents out of both Iran and China in the last couple of years. And if those countries responded by detaining or seeking the extradition of reporters involved in those stories, what would we be able to say other than, well, we're the U.S. and they're China, so it's different. We have a good legal system and they have a bad one, so it's different. You need to operate on principles that respect that kind of reciprocity, normative reciprocity, and we're completely disregarding that right now. So I still hope, and we can talk about this, I still hope that the new administration will reverse course on this. They missed an early chance to do that, but we still don't have a new attorney general confirmed. So I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail and that this case will not actually go forward.
Well, it's been a rocky ride for Julian the last 5 months since that trial. There was a lot of talk of Trump not only pardoning Julian Assange, but Ed Snowden. And people really got their hopes high on that possibility. What did you make? Did you think Trump was going to grant pardons? And do you think it was wrong for people to be kowtowing and laying low, not criticizing Trump, hoping that he would?
Well, I hope that people were not holding their fire and were not kowtowing. The thing about Trump is that anything is possible. He's so impulsive, mercurial, ignorant, that you can never say never when it involves Trump. And it's possible that the last person who speaks to him is the one who persuades him. So I understand why people believe there was a better chance to get pardons for Assange and Snowden from Trump than there would be from someone like President Biden, just because the normal rules don't apply in these situations. I certainly never had high hopes. I joked that Pompeo had probably gone around the White House hiding all the pens to make sure that this wouldn't happen. But the truth is that there were still enough people around Trump who were very adamantly against these kinds of pardons. I always thought that, at least in the Assange case, the more likely resolution here was not a pardon from Trump, but a new Justice Department making the same decision that the prior Justice Department had made, which is that this case is not a wise one to bring, and just dropping the charges.
Well, let's go back to January 4th, where Judge Baraitser did decline to send Assange back. The sole reason is because prison conditions are too bad in the U.S. But she denies him bail a few days later. What did you make of that?
I think the ruling that the prison conditions for someone like Assange or a Snowden in the U.S. are unacceptable is absolutely right. And it was interesting to see the conditions that have come to be seen as normal in the U.S. being viewed as a serious human rights violation by a close ally. These kinds of special administrative measures, which isolate prisoners even from lawyers and loved ones, from the news, were really designed for the worst terrorism cases that get used more and more frequently in cases like this involving information. Look, I don't know anything about what the rules are for bail in that situation. I'm sure there would be a possible way to allow him to get out of that prison and to account for what they view as the flight risk scenario. And it's disappointing that they haven't found a way to come up with a more humane way for him to live while these legal issues are being fought out.
Assange, you mentioned the special administrative measures. I think, Reggie, do you have that clip queued up? This is Julian talking about the SAMs a couple of years back. It's 30 seconds long. Could you play that, Reggie?
Possible, depending on the shifts in US politics, that I would be sentenced to death. Probably not. But that doesn't mean there's not a risk of a sort of living death. In the United States, there's something called SAMs, and for national security cases, terrorism cases, they put people in SAMs restrictions, which is you're in incommunicado detention. So even if you communicate something to the public through your lawyer, the lawyer goes to prison, and this has happened in the United States.
There you go, talking about that. Can you elaborate on the SAMs just a little bit more?
He's referring to the Lynn Stewart case, as you know, and this was a case where the radical defense lawyer Lynn Stewart, who had been representing one of the people involved in the first World Trade Center bombing, was later prosecuted herself because allegedly, according to the federal government, she had passed on a message from the convicted terrorist to his followers telling them to resume a fatwa, to call off a ceasefire in Egypt. And so the resulting rules essentially require lawyers to sort of sign these enforceable agreements that they will not relay messages from their own clients onto others, but they're designed to create information isolation. In some cases, people are not allowed to get newspapers until 10 or 30 days later. It's really the rationale behind the special administrative measures is that these prisoners are so dangerous that even letting them communicate with the public, creates a very real and present danger. Obviously that results very often in solitary confinement and kinds of isolation that most of the world rightly considers to be torture.
Yes, well, I certainly do. And I know that Nils Melzer has spoken on this show about SAMs being torture. I want to just get back to last Friday's decision by the Biden administration's temporary Department of Justice. I don't know who it was, if he's going to be staying or what, but that decision, do you think it was an old decision or is it a new decision by a new...
So let's just explain what the decision was. So Friday was the first deadline for the United States government to appeal from the judge's order denying extradition. And a lot of us hoped, here was an early opportunity for the Biden Department of Justice to essentially walk back. Just let this case die quietly. Go back to what had been, in fact, the position of the Obama and Holder Justice Department, which was not to bring these charges because regardless of what you might think of Assange and WikiLeaks, it's very difficult to come up with principles that would apply here that would not also apply to other news organizations. A bunch of civil society organizations, the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, Free Press organizations, Amnesty International, the Center for Constitutional Rights, all wrote a letter to the Department of Justice saying, please don't even appeal this, drop the charges. And that fell on deaf ears. They did, at least for now, decide to appeal the extradition. Look, I still think, that means that we missed the first chance to put a stake in the heart of this case. It certainly wasn't the last. My understanding of the UK legal system is that it will take quite a while before any appeal would be resolved and result in extradition. So I'm hoping that we can use the confirmation hearings for Merrick Garland and some of his deputies to call more attention to this problem. And look, I hope that the publishers of news organizations, of the New York Times, of the Wall Street Journal, even people at And Fox News will, behind the scenes, go to the Biden administration and say that this case is really dangerous for them and the people who work for them.
Well, I don't see how it could be positive for Biden. I mean, he did get support from a lot of progressives that didn't support Hillary in 2016. Everybody came around on this one. I even came down and voted for the guy in New York City. Not that it was even needed, a vote for him, but I wanted to get rid of the last guy. And now we have to deal with Biden. And what is your take, a preliminary take or any knowledge that you have on Merrick Garland?
So I don't have a take on Garland. Look, here's what I will say about the politics of the situation. And this is why this is such a scary case, is there's never going to be broad support in the United States for Assange. The right likes this case because they want to see more journalists prosecuted. The Democrats like this case because they blame Assange for Trump being elected in 2016, and view him as a Russian agent. So there are obviously people who care about press freedom. There are progressives. There is a constituency of people who are worried about this case, but it's not going to be broad appeal. It's precisely cases where majorities are hostile to the defendant when these kinds of bad principles are established. So if we're talking about convincing Biden and the people around him, it's not going to be sympathy for Julian. It's not going to be the plight that he personally is facing. It's going to be the publisher of the New York Times saying, who's a very important ally, right, to any president, that this case is fundamentally a threat to the New York Times and a priority for them to have the administration change course.
I can deduce that this is not a popular cause in this country. I've been on this now. This is my fifth year. I've done at least 120 shows on this issue, and I can tell you that I do not have a burgeoning audience for Julian. So, but it's the fundamental principle. I mean, how important is it? What in this country would happen going after him under the Espionage Act? How critical. I mean, there are a lot of people in prison in this country. There are a lot of people being tortured. There are a lot of people that shouldn't be in prison, and I know that. There's Leonard Peltier, a lot of people that I'd like to get behind, but I've been obsessed with this case because I think it is so dangerous. Do you agree with that?
Right. Yes. I mean, we have the Espionage Act has been a hideous law in this country since 1917. But in that hideous history, it has never once been used to prosecute somebody for publishing truthful information. So this will be the first time in the ignominious 100-year history of the Espionage Act that it's being used to prosecute someone for doing what we need journalists to do, which is to ferret out the government's embarrassing secrets and to provide them to the public, regardless of what the government might prefer. Right? This is an absolutely vital function in any democracy. And if you think about it, the government is now saying that is a criminal conspiracy. Well, look, of course it is. All good investigative journalism is a criminal conspiracy, if you look at it that way. It's just never been charged as such. And I'm not being facetious here. Right? The job of a good national security investigative journalist is to go to somebody who has access to privileged information and to persuade that person to commit a felony by divulging it to the public. That's a conspiracy, right? And now this is the first time that conduct is being slapped into a felony complaint and prosecuted. And there simply is no way to establish that precedent and not have it hang over the head of what we absolutely need our journalists to do on a day-to-day basis.
The nefarious Espionage Act of 1917 was originally used as a tool to repress dissent. People like Eugene Debs went to jail. There was a producer of movies back then, Robert Goldstein, that went to prison because he criticized the Brits in a movie. So it has a very negative, unwholesome, background, the Espionage Act of 1917. Let's go on to another guy who's, I guess, is under. You're the lead attorney for Ed Snowden. He faces espionage Act charges in this country. How is he doing? How is he holding up?
Well, it's not a secret anymore. He and his wife, Lindsay, had a baby boy, a son, at the end of December. So he is struggling like a lot of other young parents in this world, in winter, in lockdown, with a newborn at home, trying to balance work and child rearing. But look, he's doing great.
You haven't been able to visit him since the pandemic.
Well, I haven't. It's the last time I was there was a year ago this month, just before the pandemic. We were working on turning his memoir, Permanent Record, into a young reader's edition, one that's a little shorter, and that just came out a couple of weeks ago. A version of the book that's really aimed at 12, 13-year-old readers rather than older ones. So
give us the name of both of those books, because people can still buy them, and they should, even though the profits go to the U.S. government, they should, because people should know what happened.
I assure you that the U.S. government would rather you not read the book or buy it for your kid than get the 99 cents that they're going to get for each copy that's sold. So definitely get it. The book is called Permanent Record. I would urge people to get the adult version, even for their precocious children. But if there's someone who's 10 or 11 or 12 who's very interested in this, I like the idea of having that book, show up in school libraries. And really, get directly into the hands and minds of kids without any government interference.
Yes. Well, we hope him well, and maybe this pandemic will be over soon, and you can get over there and visit him. I doubt if he really wants to come back to this country at this point in time. Even if he does get a pardon, does he really want to come back? Would he feel safe in this country?
Let's just say he'd like to have the option, and I would like for him to have the option. What he would do if he had that option, I can't say, and he probably won't say yet. But look, it's only a matter of time, right? Our friend Daniel Ellsberg in 1971 was being accused of worse things than Ed has ever been accused of. The Nixon administration, said that he had given a copy of the Pentagon Papers to the Soviet embassy, which was complete nonsense. And now, he's widely revered as a hero in this country, even across the political spectrum. Snowden has that future. How long it will take us to get there, I don't know.
Right. We've been talking to Ben Wizner. Ben Wizner, you're a busy man. I wanted to talk to you about this Khaled El-Masri case. Do you have a minute to? Because I was watching a video of you with him.
Sure.
A couple of years back. In a couple of minutes, can you summarize that case? Because then we have to go.
Yeah. This was a really, really notorious case, and your listeners surely remember the CIA's Extraordinary Rendition Program. This is when the CIA would send kidnapping teams to snatch foreign citizens off the street, bundle them into planes, fly them off to secret detention and torture in other countries in violation of U.S. and international law. El-Masri was a German citizen, which is why he ended up only being detained and tortured for 5 months instead of, disappeared into Guantanamo or elsewhere. But he was picked up in a case of mistaken identity. The CIA grabbed him in Macedonia. They flew him to a secret prison in Afghanistan. They knew almost right away that they had the wrong person. And again, I think if he had been a Moroccan citizen or a Libyan citizen rather than a German citizen, they would have just held him or taken him to Guantanamo. Because he was a European citizen, a German citizen, they had to find a way to release him with clean hands. So they ended up dumping him on a hill in Albania, hoping that no one would believe his story. He made his way to us. We found him and sued the CIA and its contractors for having done this to an innocent person. The great indignity is that the CIA never said, we didn't do this. The CIA never said, we did it, but it was okay. They said, this fact that the whole world knows is a state secret. This person's account, which can be told anywhere in the world, cannot be told in the U.S. courtroom without harming national security. The whole subject is a state secret. And every level of the federal courts accepted that argument, and his case was just thrown out without any kind of adjudication. Now, separately, there were proceedings in European courts because, Macedonia had a minor role in this. And the European Court of Human Rights said, no, in fact, this is unacceptable, this is torture, this is rendition, it violates the law, and he's entitled to compensation. So, remarkably, he won compensation from the Macedonian government for its minor role in this in European courts, and got nothing but dismissal from the U.S. courts. And if people want to read more about this, his name is Khalid El-Masri. A lot of information about this online on the ACLU's website. He has been free now for some time. Definitely struggled at first. Had mental health issues that certainly were exacerbated by his time in CIA custody. But he is doing a lot better now, and has been, I think, a very effective spokesman for this issue.
It's a great story and a tragic story. Thank you very much, Ben, for affording us all of this time.
Randy.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Ben Weisner of the ACLU. I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico Live on the Fly. Support this station, and maybe we'll see you next week. There's talk that I might be running for mayor, but don't be listening to that. See you next week, folks, hopefully.
We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away.